Afternoon, everyone. Just give it another minute or so. I see people coming in, people joining. Just leave it a few more seconds. See if anyone's still trying to get in. My colleague Molly did say that some people had some issues with the joining instructions. So well done for getting here. Well, we are just a couple of minutes after past, so I'll get started now. Thank you so much for joining me today. Really nice to spend some time with you on this Thursday afternoon. So for those of you I haven't spoken with before or met before, my name is Sam Hinton, and I'm the Director of Policy and Communications at NGA. So today, this webinar that I'll be delivering is very much looking at the Senior Executive Leaders Report to the board. You might know that as the Head Teachers Report or CEO's Report, or depending on what context you're governing in. So we're going to be exploring numerous elements of board reporting in this session today. So these are just the points that I wanted to cover with you, and I'm going to make sure that we stick fairly tightly to the half an hour mark. I appreciate it's evening time, and it's drawing near, and I want to make sure that you'll get to go and enjoy your evening straight after this. So we're going to cover these 3 points. If there are any questions, any points you don't think I've covered, anything that there's still a question mark over by the time we reach the end. What I've done on my last slide is included I've included my email address, so you can email me directly. I haven't got time to answer direct questions in the session itself today, but do email me if there was anything that you wanted to follow up at the end of this session. Okay, so to get us started, I just wanted to start with these 2 poll questions. So Molly, if you could launch the first one for us. I just really wanted to get a sense check really of where people are at in terms of their school reports. So if you could just tell us which of these statements most fits your current standing with the reports at your school or trust, just to give us an indication of where we're at as a group today. So Molly will close that once we've got a good number that have completed that one. And we can have a look at the results of that one when it's ready. So it's interesting. So we've got a real mix. Lots of you actually really positively saying it's just right, provides a clear picture. Just over a third of you saying that. Almost a half of you saying there's room for improvement, but there's certainly a good few of you saying that it's more than just room for improvement. So the next poll question was really about length, and whether you thought that was right or not, or there was some work to be done there. So again, if you could give us an indication of which of these statements best suits your current experience with board reporting, that would be really helpful. And we'll have a look at the results of that one in just a second. So it's ready. Interesting. Okay, so that one's probably slightly more work to be done overall, but there's still a fair few of you actually pretty much exactly on the third mark, saying that it's the perfect length. So interesting that actually I think there'd certainly be some people on this webinar today that have probably got some tips of their own. So do use the chat function for that. Although I can't see it myself and I can't actually see your faces or anything, obviously do feel free to use that to put any ideas or any thoughts that you've got, and just any feedback for us as well. That would be really helpful. Right, so I'll move to my next slide. So where to start? What I've done really is to pick this out of this document, which many of you will be familiar with, and that is actually going through a review at the moment. So there'll be a new iteration of this document that we produce alongside other partner organisations that will be coming out fairly soon. But the substance will be very much the same, and these points, I think, will pretty much say what they say now, and that's really just to draw your attention to the dual responsibility here, and the different levels of expectations for both boards and school leaders themselves. So there's clearly two viewpoints that I really wanted us to explore on this topic in this session today: the board and the executive leaders themselves, and both need to come back to what the purpose of reporting is, and making sure we're not falling into traps over time where unhelpful reporting develops over time. And many governors and trustees simply might not have had time to really think about it. There's simply never been much of a question around what is reported and why, and what that format is, and whether there's been space and time to have that conversation. I think it's fair to say you can save a lot of frustration and wasted time simply by making time in the first place to have that discussion. And if your leaders are producing reams and reams of paperwork that doesn't work for the purpose of the board overall, whilst I think it's perhaps quite a delicate conversation to have sometimes, ultimately it will save them lots of time and indeed costs to the organisation by addressing it now. So executive leaders really should provide the information necessary to enable governors and trustees to regularly monitor progress against school development priorities, targets, and budgets, for example, but crucially providing that information in the most appropriate way for the board to carry out its role. And one of the arguments I've been making in this session is that actually part of the process here is making sure there is a review process in place, or a review cycle in place, in terms of how you look and see whether your reporting is working or not. So I've put this quote here, which I think is really helpful, just to kind of pose the dilemma. I'll let you read that. But it just gives you a flavour of what many boards face, actually. And I'm not just talking in the school sector. I think much of what I'm talking about today is taken from cross-sector practice. This stuff is just not as simple as we would like it to be. And you might take comfort, hopefully, in the fact that most organisations across multiple sectors struggle with this in one way or another. And in some sectors, board reporting in itself, is massive business. Huge costs are involved, and there's been research done in the past that's revealed that the board reports are and board packs in coming together are getting longer. There's more time and energy, and crucially, the costs associated with them are going up as well. So obviously for our session, we're primarily focusing on the senior executive leaders report, but it's all part of it. And I bet if I was to ask an executive leader today, how much time, if you were to add up all the time that goes into the report, to your board, or even just the time and effort that goes into that senior executive leaders report, it would be a significant number of hours, and many executive leaders in preparing their report to the board, but lots and lots of effort, rightly so. There's that investment of time, rightly so, but clearly as a result of all that time that's going in, there's a need to get it right, and for it to be as targeted and effective as possible, for you as the governing board. Cross-sector findings suggest that while lots of time and cost and energy go into board reporting, often the people who receive the reports feedback that they find them weak or unhelpful, and they're not always to the point enough. So I think that's what, going back to the poll earlier, I think it's really encouraging that we've got a good number of you that are quite positive actually about how your board reporting is being received. But just on this point, I think there's a question here that we can all ask, is whether we've ever had an external viewpoint looking at how effective our board reporting is, and whether the senior executive leaders report is really doing the right job for everyone on the board. And that having that independent sense check, I think, can be really, really helpful. The whole point around the senior executive leaders report is to enable the board to focus with focused conversations, but sometimes they can do the opposite, and key messages can get lost in that overcrowded narrative, or lots of internal data that hasn't been explained, or perhaps assumes a certain level of data interpretation expertise that isn't there for the whole board. So I think these are all things we need to consider. That research that I mentioned earlier, one of the other findings that came out of it was that actually lots and lots of boards don't provide any form of feedback to their executive leaders or to their the people providing the board reporting, and so those people who are putting all of that time and effort in to producing those reports are sometimes stumbling around in the dark and don't really have an idea and a feel for how effective the board itself is finding those reports. There's often no brief on what boards are expecting and what they want and need, and so really there's a responsibility both ways on this, isn't there? So while it's the board's role to give a brief and to feedback, clearly it's the exec's job to provide the board with the information it needs, and high quality, timely information and narrative that equips, not hinders or distorts the role of governance is so important. I'm sure this is something that some of you here have faced before, but simply pushing lots of information and data onto a page without narrative and context, it doesn't work for the majority of volunteers. It might work for the people on your board that have a very good level of expertise in the education sector, for example, or very, come from a data background, for example, but by and large, not everyone on the board will have that expertise behind them. So we also shouldn't assume that executive leaders themselves have ever received the training they need on how best to do this. And if the executive leader doesn't have the right interpretation of the role of governance itself, or even, dare I say it, the right level of appreciation for governance, there's little chance that their reporting will truly aid effective governance decision making. So these are all things that I think we need to be aware of. Everyone on the board, including the newest and the less experienced recruits, really need to be empowered to engage and to contribute in discussions. And the board should also possess an awareness of how the information within the report is collected, the frequency, and you know, if the answer to those questions is actually, you know, we need to come up with a different solution because actually it's taking way too much time, then obviously that's a question for the board to address with the senior executive leader. Boards and executive leaders should have regard to the principles and recommendations laid out by the DFE as well, clearly. A few years ago, I think it's maybe it's certainly before the pandemic, maybe 2019, there was a report released called Making Data Work, which some of you might be familiar with, which I think the governance handbook still refers to. If you haven't looked at that, that's quite a helpful report to look at in terms of, it makes the point that the requirements within the reporting to the board need to avoid unreasonable and ad hoc data requests, and you know, need to be mindful of the work with it. But you know, I think there's a big but here. We as boards, we need to make sure that we don't let that become a reason to not provide the feedback. You absolutely should not be settling with reporting that doesn't work for the board. But there's clearly a question around what that means in practice. I think it means, and it's kind of what I'm trying to lay it out here, it means having a reporting format that enables the board to really stay focused on their strategic functions. It means having reporting that doesn't allow the board to get distracted and overwhelmed by information of secondary importance and pulling you into the operational. Like I said, I think it means that the board is proactive in the review of the data requests and the presentation technique itself as well, and doing this while always having that mind to thinking about avoiding unnecessary workload. Crucially, I guess it means executive reports need to really empower, not put off the board to ask the right questions, those searching questions, those pertinent questions that are needed for effective decision making. So I've put this question here, which I think is just a helpful way of getting our mind in the right place on this. I think by assurance, what I'm talking about is that assurance you have the full picture means feeling that you're alert to the change affecting the running of the organization. So by that I mean you need to be alert to the changes impacting the strategic aims, but not necessarily the actual day-to-day changes themselves. And there's always that point in the back of my mind, you know, let's not go into the operational here. The executive report needs to give you the assurance the strategic milestones are being met in a way that really connects and speaks to every member of the board, like I said earlier, including the least experienced. So having a RAG rated system, red, amber, green, that rates milestones while simple, I think is really helpful. You know, even if you don't have the knowledge behind that every data set and what it means, you can see if you're on target or not, and can then legitimately ask, why is this one red? Why has this one been amber for the last 2 years, and so on. There's clearly a balance to achieve between being to the point and not overloaded, but being transparent and having enough to give a full understanding of which strategies are going well and which strategies are not going so well. So while you don't want all the detail, you do want to know about the overall performance and the resourcing information that's attached to that, and whether strategic priorities have got the attention required or not. So assurance really is not just a matter of compliance. I don't think that's just what I'm talking about here, but it's also a matter of culture, and things are all in order. That the reports from the external experts are there as well, but there is also a cultural element, and thinking about that culture of ambition and transparency, and how the board report really plays into that, or whether or not you think, as has been the case, and some of the people we've spoken to in the past, that I think the senior executive leader reports are not actually portraying the full picture, and really there's a pick and mix approach, that's telling you what they want you to hear, rather than the full picture. So I think having that kind of mindset is really important to getting board reporting right. So some common issues from the work we've done over the years that we've picked up, and many of these won't be surprising to you, and we've touched on some of them already. Clearly not being strategic enough, there being too much or not enough, as we dealt with in the poll. These are probably the more obvious ones. And when we carry out external reviews of governance, an aspect of our framework includes looking at the documents that the governing board requests and receives, and we know from this scrutiny that the head teacher reports differ wildly in content and form. Some that I've seen are literally kind of 3 pages long. Some are 30, some are 60 plus. So it's varies massively, but many that we've seen still cover operational matters in quite extensive detail. Some list things such as visitors to school and topics covered in assemblies and so on, quite operational matters. But many report on standards, which absolutely is really important, though often in a fairly random manner, which makes it hard to see if children are on track or not, let alone to help you as a board spot trends. Relatively few reports that we have seen and come across report on progress being made towards delivering the actual agreed strategy that the board has agreed, and there's often not much of a visible link to that. Although I think it's worth saying here, I think that has definitely become more common than when we looked at this a few years ago. Commonly, what we see is simply way too much paper, too much information just before the meeting can even begin. Just still something that is still a problem. And as well as the executive and the staff workload in the preparation, I think sometimes it can be easy to forget about the matter of governor and trustee workload, and actually whether the reports have been formed in a way that have really taken this into consideration. And I think if that's a concern that you have, it's something that you should definitely either speak to your chair about, or if you are a chair, obviously have that conversation as a collective, have that conversation with the leader themselves. Stagnant board culture is something I wanted to mention here, because I think some of the feedback we've had before is from perhaps newer members of the board that have come in and haven't really understood the way things are presented. The report doesn't connect with them. It doesn't really help them do their role. But when they've challenged this, I think they've met pushback, and actually other people in the board saying, well, this is what we do, like it or lump it, sort of thing. So I think it's just important to bear in mind that and I'm sure you do this anyway, that actually that there is when new people join your board, it's an opportunity to really see if the way that the board reporting is working working for everyone, including brand new recruits to the board. So I guess the final thing I'll say on this slide is clearly the way executive reports are presented to the board varies massively, and when it's just lots of internal data that no one else understands, that can become actually a barrier to board decision making rather than something that aids it. So I think continually thinking about what the purpose of the board reporting is a really key thing in terms of that self-review process as well. So this next slide is really just put it here just to help us get thinking about board reporting it as in a sort of the cyclical nature of it, and improving board reporting is actually a matter of not just making our lives easier, but it's a matter of efficiency, of effectiveness. The benefits arising from securing a better process will enhance board culture. It will enhance clearly how effective meetings are. It will enhance board behavior even. So identifying and agreeing on this information should be seen, I think, as a cyclical process. And this is really, again, taken from cross sector practice, where actually it's important to not isolate the report itself from the actual process of forming it. All of your executive leaders will have data at their disposal, clearly, but they won't always know what the board actually finds most helpful unless there's actually as I said earlier, been time to discuss that. And I've seen some board reports that literally include the questions for boards to ask. I personally, I think that is maybe taking it a step too far. Getting the information right is one thing, but the report really needs to be there to aid, not dictate conversation. I'm sure there may well be some people on the webinar that may disagree and may find those questions really helpful. But I think, whether it's helpful or not, I think even if you're using questions within the report, I think those around the board table need to still feel free to venture beyond those questions, and I think making sure that there is freedom to do that is really important. So if the executive or the board is worried about questions being asked, I think clearly there's a training need there. And as the board prioritizes changing over time, the changes over time to its board reporting, there's a need for the reporting to really reflect both how the board itself has changed, and also how the organization is evolving and the changes it's going through. And that means that perhaps some very long standing points that have been given a big space within that senior executive leaders report, maybe it's not quite as relevant as it once was, or maybe there's a whole area that's missing. And so thinking about whether the format and what's included within the report really is a true reflection of where you're at the moment. So I'm very, very conscious of time. Lessons from cross sector practice, I'll skip over this one really, because I think we've covered it in some detail, but it's just to say that it's a challenge for everybody, no matter what type of organization you're in, and how the report suits the needs of your board, I think is really important to think about it in terms of lots of the issues that you might personally be feeling, others might be feeling it as well. So there's this quote here from on governance professionals finding them often overlong and unfocused. So we have always resisted providing any templates for executive reports, senior executive leader reports, purely because it's quite a personal thing to your individual organization in lots of ways. We're often asked about this, but it's I think how you lay it out and what you included really needs to reflect your organization. I don't think there's a clear-cut list of everything. But this just gives you an idea in terms of minimum requirements and the sort of things that you would expect to see. So I think if there's things on here which you don't see often, and you're worried about aren't including, perhaps that's a question mark that you can go back with and find out why that hasn't been on your reports to date. Just very quickly, I won't go through these now, but these will be in the slides. These are the list of 12 questions on board reporting and getting it right from ICSA, or CGI as they're now called. So you can use them if you find them helpful. My final couple of slides were around triangulation. I'm not going to go into that in much detail, other than to say, obviously, the board report in itself is never going to be the entirety of the picture. While we have we've focused a lot on the quality of reporting and the information, actually we still hear feedback today from Ofsted that sometimes they come across boards that seem to too quickly trust the information that they're provided with. So actually cross-checking that information with other sources of information and triangulating it against other sources of information, really important. And I think having an external perspective there, those third-party reports can be really helpful on those areas where perhaps we don't always feel as qualified to know whether the picture we are being given is correct or not. And they're just a few of those sources of those information that you can use in the triangulation process. So for my final slide, really, it was just a summary point. I guess at the end of all of this, it comes right back round to NGO's 8 elements of governance. If you have a look at those, you can see how much of them we've picked up on today. And it may well be tricky approaching the senior executive leader, asking them to change what they may well have been doing for a very long time. But in the long term, quality reporting to the board is likely to make life easier for them, reduce the time requirements for them and the workload requirements for them. So that's a win all round. And understanding that the role and responsibilities, being committed to asking the challenging questions, to having the confidence to have courageous conversations, these are all part of these 8 elements. So crucially, I think when we think about board reporting, that remembering that the need for a clear relation to the strategic aims of the organisation, and how we are linking what we're being told back to our vision and strategy, and whether we're doing that at all. And like I said earlier, not all the head teachers reports and executive leader reports out there do that. So I'm going to finish there. Thank you so much for joining me today on this webinar. Really appreciate you joining us. This will be available on our website soon. The slides will go out to everyone, yeah, I'll leave it there. Oh, actually, before I finish, there's one more slide here just on our upcoming events. So if there's any on there that you're not aware of, have a look at that and come and join us with any of these. You can book on through our website. So thank you so much for joining. There's my email address there if anybody did want to get anything back, but I know that there's been quite a lot of I can see that there's been comments on the chat. I can't actually see them, but I will have a look at those as well. But thank you so much for joining, and I hope you all have a good evening.